So hi everyone. Thanks to Andy and Gilbert for taking us round the estate. That'll give you a real good flavour for the existing housing, but also, what we're about to talk about. So I'm Caroline Dearden, and I'm one of the directors at Anderson Bell Christie Architects, and I'm joined with Rowena Statt, who's our Research and Development Director. And we both worked on the Gannochy project, and we'll be taking you through that journey shortly. So we're an employee-owned company. We're an architect company based in Glasgow, and tomorrow we're celebrating our 5-year anniversary of becoming employee-owned. And but the company itself has been working in social housing for 35 years. So it's really the core of what we do, and a lot of research as well, which is I think why we're probably successful with working with Gannochy on the expansion project. So Rowena's going to share a bit about the start of our journey in terms of developing the brief and master plan, and I'll take you through how that then came through to fruition for design and construction.
So I think when we were going around the estate, quite a few people said to me, why is the housing expansion area ended up looking the way it does? Why is it not a standard housing estate where you're following what the planners are asking you to do, where you've got your habitable rooms at the front and you've got a set of rules? So why is it different? And I think the master planning process and the briefing process starts to explain why that is. So the process started really before we even got involved. The trust and the trustees involved a guy called, I think, Raymond Young, to put together a vision. They had a series of workshops. Raymond Young kind of worked out what the trustees were looking for and put together a written document that described the kind of place that the trust were after. And that was very much not about money and making money out of housing development. It wasn't about catering for a specific group. It was very much about community and about doing something that would really suit the housing that was already there, but not just the housing, the people that are living there at the moment. So the master plan was to really a very standard process in a way. We looked at all of the areas in the red line, within the red line boundary that Andy talked about earlier. So that was the whole estate, not just the housing. We looked at things like biodiversity, green-blue routes. We looked at improving agricultural land and with potential sites for different sorts of uses, how we could reuse existing buildings. And we developed a series of design principles coming out of those. And then we started to focus in on the housing area and how those design principles and the way the wider estate was organised could start to inform our designs. And we didn't do it by ourselves. We worked with people living in the houses who had not just experience of the physicality of the estate, but these were people whose parents and grandparents had lived in the houses really since they were constructed. Some of the original workmen's offspring and grandchildren were in the houses now. So there's this terrific continuity and shared history that was very important. One of the things we did was a housing needs survey. We looked at the people living in the existing properties to see what kind of housing they needed. And one thing that became very apparent very quickly was we had a very big proportion of people that were older. 58% of the people in the older houses were aged over 65, 17% were aged between 50 and 65, and only 25% were under 50. So we had really a problem starting to build up. We had an older population living in houses which we visited, which have got steps, which are not easy to convert. So it became apparent fairly quickly that whatever we were going to do in the housing expansion area was really going to have to cater for people as they got older that might want to downsize. But at the same time, if we wanted an integrated community, we didn't want to just introduce families into the larger houses. Smaller properties in the housing expansion area would give what we would call starter families an opportunity to move into the area and then move up into a bigger house as they went. So the housing needs survey was an important stepping stone into building a kind of cohesive community. So one of the key things we really wanted to do was look at how people could age well in place. This is a nice bit of jargon that just starts to say, you want to be able to stay in your house for as long as you can. It's not just the housing design that matters, it's the neighbourhood where your house is that's important as well. How do we design that to really make it easy for people to stay where they want to live for as long as they can? And this is where this idea of a lifetime neighbourhood came in, where somebody could come in as a family with children, and as the people living here have actually demonstrated, stay really for their whole lives until they're really too old to stay in their homes any longer. So not just the homes, the green infrastructure, I think, that supports the homes is just as important. We can see the fantastic, really robust landscaping and what the difference that makes. And then the importance of healthy homes. I think discussions about air quality, indoor air quality, affordability for heating and flexibility, and the ability as well to be able to alter your home quickly, so that if you have a disability you can stay, or if you have a disability you can move into one of these new houses. So this is a great photo that shows the importance of the landscape. At the bottom is a photo of the street when it was constructed, with no landscaping, and the houses look fine but not particularly amazing. And then at the top we've got these amazing beech hedges, which and the mature trees. I mean, it makes an astonishing difference. I think the beech hedges nowadays as well do a great job in hiding cars that are parked in drives. You just don't really see them. So there's a lot of cars, but we don't know they're there. So I think one of the key design principles we thought was very important was to continue this kind of landscape strategy. It's working. We want to continue it into the new housing neighbourhood, the beech hedges and the tree planting. The existing estate, I think somebody described it as cosy. I think it is very cosy, but it's very beautiful. So there were all sorts of key characteristics to do with the massing and the materials used in the existing houses that we wanted to, if not so much replicate, but complement, so that we weren't putting in a standard 2-storey semi-detached rendered house. We were going to give people something that reflected the houses that were there already. And an important part of that wasn't just the materials and massing of individual houses, it was the amazing southwest facing grid that all of those houses are using, and the way that the road network interacts with that grid, so that even if the houses are very uniform and very uniformly located, as you go along a street, you're getting very different views of them. So each street is very different to the next, and without actually having to think too hard about where the houses go. So we can see here we've got fantastic landscaping, we've got beautiful overhanging eaves, hipped roofs, really good daylighting, nice big windows. These are all of the elements of the existing housing that we wanted to move and carry on with in the new development. And then going back, I think, to green spaces associated with the houses, this idea of different kinds of sociable spaces was an important one, and this is really where the idea of the situatories started to come from. You know, we wanted to see, I did a guided walk through I think it was Kirkintilloch, with a series of people with dementia and their carers, and it was very interesting to see what kind of spaces people with dementia were comfortable in and where they really didn't want to be. So people with dementia, which we're hoping these houses are going to be very dementia friendly, so as people age and if they develop dementia they can easily be adapted for them. But if you have dementia, what people like to do is just sit and observe, really. They needed a nice private space where they felt protected and they could watch what was going on. And then I think, you know, as they felt more confident, which is number 2 in the top right corner, they might move forward. They might move on to move 3 down here, where you're looking at spaces where you could kind of come out into a more sociable world, but you're still observing. And finally, other activities that people might want to do where other people are observing them and they don't mind being watched. So it was really thinking about green space, not just in terms of what it looked like, but how people were going to use it and how comfortable they would feel in it. And we ended up as the master plan, not just producing plan layouts of the estate, we did these little visualizations of the kind of places we could have where you've got people in wheelchairs that are integrated. We've got shared green spaces, we've got our situtories, and at the bottom we've got green spaces that have the potential to be used for different uses over time. So maybe, at the moment somebody might want to use it as a community garden, but it could be adapted as a children's storytelling space or used to locate a men's shed. But I think all of them, what we've tried to do is maintain a sense of connection so that people, you do get that sense of community. And that all of these ideas, these design principles came together, and these were just some initial sketches for the housing expansion area where we're looking at this grid, we're continuing the grid. We've got the green spaces there where we've got opportunities for people to socialise. We've got a very standard road layout because we found that people that have visual impairments, perceptual difficulties, people with dementia are not too keen on shared surfaces. It doesn't always work. So we've really gone for quite a standard road layout, and we've continued hopefully the same massing, proportions and scale of the existing housing. So the master plan has really sort of set the scene for the next stage of the process, which Caroline is going to talk about now.
Do you want to swap sides?
Oh, just sit down.
Okay. So yeah, in terms of developing from the very well-established brief, and that came through a lot of the Gannochy estate's sort of design principles, and a lot of feedback from the community. A big driver was the context. Ultimately, you've seen what special place this is, but also that sort of human experiential aspect of how people move around the site, the access to quality green space, and that investment in really beautiful landscaping as well. So beyond the brief, we continued to do a lot of research and development before we, as part of developing the designs through to sort of planning stage. And that was exploring aspects to do with the fabric, looking at what the healthy homes and what healthy ventilation, what's that evolution from the plaques that Andy shared with us earlier to, what is appropriate for nowadays. But also looking at how we make the homes adaptable for the lifetime sort of homes and neighbourhood aspect. So what Janice will be sharing shortly is just a bit about some of the data that's being collated at the moment, where we're sort of evaluating feedback from the tenants in terms of how successful the build has been. So something that was really important for Gannochy was that the project was relevant. It was affordable solutions that other housing associations and house builders could learn from. And so the work that we're continuing to do in terms of that evaluation is really important, to really make sure that what we set out to do has been achieved in terms of the technical aspirations. Another part of the research and development was actually going to visit other projects, looking at what are the opportunities in terms of designing streets, communal living, community spaces, access to outdoors. And one of the projects that sparked a lot of conversation and had a lot of synergy with a lot of the aspirations and design principles set out in the master plan was Methven Park in Dumbarton that we delivered. And similar to what you probably experienced today, actually seeing people using the situtories and having those sort of passive conversations with them, and actually seeing how they all personalised that space and really took a lot of joy out of that. Because even when it started raining, there were people still sat out, and they were talking to us and inquiring what we were doing. But even just the joy that they had with the courtyards, the private courtyards, and how they similarly took ownership and enjoyed that as a community. So they were really important takeaways from that visit. So as Rowena sort of talked about, the site that we looked at was to the south east of the existing estate, and just beyond that there was a field, and the connectivity as we kind of experience today in terms of that access to all these green pockets was also a part of the master plan in terms of access to this sort of wild meadow beyond the new housing estate. So whilst that provided additional sort of health and wellbeing opportunities for the new tenants, it was also about providing that connectivity for existing tenants. So looking at the sort of proposed layout in a bit more detail, as Rowena said, we've got a loop road which feeds the 48 houses, and then off that we've got sort of more sort of private lanes which take you into almost like cul-de-sac arrangements. But you know, a lot of those principles in terms of the hierarchy of the road, the sort of road design, you know, all came from the existing estate, but just looking at how we would, you know, better that in terms of visitor parking, passing places, narrowing the road for traffic calming. It was just the next sort of evolution in terms of what how we approach that. In terms of the dementia sort of design aspects, it was important to create landmarks. So as you'd have seen today, the 1.5 story family homes are positioned in key corners, and that provides a bit of wayfinding, as well as how we delineated paths and the streets, and even some of the doors are different colours to help with that wayfinding. But really, you know, it's about that pedestrian priority. And another key aspect was the communal gardens, and you'd seen that started planting up the orchard to the north of the site. And I think what was really lovely about how Gannochy approached that was actually that was just a piece of the master plan that they chose not to develop immediately. Whilst the principles were there for the detailed design, it was really an opportunity to bring the new tenants together, do some more collaboration and co-design, and, you know, build on that sort of community and making that space work for them. In terms of the house design, similar to the existing estate, the anchor space is really the living room, which is on the southwest corner. The other thing that we did was the sort of semi-open plan layout with the living room opened up to the kitchen, which meant you got views through the house, so you can see people approaching your front door or looking out into your garden, and then the communal spaces beyond that. So that works really well for young families or older couples in terms of that security and that sort of passive surveillance. And in terms of the bedrooms, so predominantly most of them are the 2 beds, and you've got the primary bedroom, which also is next to the situtory. And again, in terms of adaptability, you've got the opportunity to knock through to the bathroom if you needed hoists. All the doors are sized for wheelchairs, and obviously with the second bedroom, that could provide children's bedroom or carer accommodation or workspace as well. So lots of opportunities for adaptation there. And yeah, I think the last point, and just in terms of good sunlight and, you know, in terms of the size of the windows and the ventilation approach, which I'll talk about shortly. So I'll zoom through these photos because we've experienced it. But yeah, I think, you know, how everyone's really enjoyed these situtories has been a real joy to see, and, you know, hearing stories and feedback. So we've spent quite a lot of time in Gannochy since it's been completed, and hearing from Andy and Gilbert. So there was one tenant in particular who's moved in with his mum, who's in a wheelchair, and, you know, it's been life-changing for him, and that's a real success story because there hasn't been a huge amount of need to make huge adaptations to the property, and so it's evidence that's working really well. And some photos of, you know, people enjoying all those routes through those community spaces and how the houses look onto that. And some photos of just how we've really nestled and sort of stitch together the new and existing with the building form, the quality materials, and really the layout. Some more photos. And I think, again, similarly with the landscaping, that was really important to provide some screening, but continue that quality that exists in the existing estate. And I think it's been great to see today how the hedging's really taken, and it's really seamless, I think, with the original houses. And some more photos. And this one's just really just to highlight that there were some level changes, and we did try our best to try and minimise retention as best as we could, but also use the levels to help with, you know, overlooking and privacy and just how the houses are all kind of come together. That was an important aspect that we had to test quite early on. So in terms of the house typologies, we've got 2-bed detached homes, 2-bed semi-detached and 1-bed terraces, as well as the 4 3-bed accessible houses. But really, in terms of the design principles, the massing, you know, you can see there how the roof concept kind of carried through the passive stack ventilation, you know, worked for all the layouts, and the provision of the statutory. So the south-west facing statutories sort of deeper, but there was also the benefit of some deeper recesses to the north, which just gave people options as well, depending on the orientation and what you're looking onto. So you'd have seen that today as well. And I think whilst we were trying for betterment, you know, the starting point's always fabric first. So it is timber kit. We are using fibre, wood fibre insulation, and I think I heard Andy sort of talking about the roof and the complexities and just the craftsmanship, you know, from the guys working on site, and you'd even seen like the really beautiful lead detailing. So I think a lot has got to be commended with Campion there. And just briefly through the ventilation strategy, I don't know if Janice, you're going to maybe share a bit more on that. Okay, good. We're not repeating each other. So you'd have seen, or maybe not, it's because quite discreet, but in all the windows we've got overhead built-in sort of trickle vents. And obviously because of the size of the windows, we can exceed minimum sort of building regs. And then over the heads of all the doors, which face into the corridor of all the rooms, we've got vents into the wall, and the doors are undercut. And then the vent leading to the passive stack is centred in the corridor. All the wet rooms in the kitchen still have demouth, so direct extract, and that's just on a as and when needed. But in all the rooms we've got CO2 sensors and thermostats, and that helps automate sort of boost ventilation using the passive stack, but there is also a manual override. Oh, good. And I just wanted to finish on this beautiful photo, because I think, you know, these are the original people, and you can see the original house as well of the people that built the estate. And I think the success of the project, as Andy shared, there's been many awards, is down to, I think, the investment in time and in research and design that Gannochy have invested in, but also collaboration. There's been a lot of people involved in the project, and just an opportunity to thank Gannochy for the opportunity, and looking forward to doing, you know, more in the next master plan as well. And I do have a little find. So we've been doing some work in the office, and actually have this to give you. So I'll give that to you just now.
Well, thank you very much.
Hi everyone. I'm Janice Foster. I'm from the Mackintosh Environmental Architecture Research Unit at the Glasgow School of Art. I suppose about me, I'm a chartered building services engineer, so I'm not an architect, but I work alongside architects pretty much every day. I do have a master's in architecture, but my degree is building services, so specialised in mechanical and electrical design, but I worked mainly as mechanical engineer for Arup and Bureau Happold for quite a long time. And in one of the recessions, I was made redundant, and that's how my journey came to academia. So I've been working at the MAC for 11 years, doing building performance evaluation on all types of buildings. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is how MEARU fits into this whole complex kind of like web that we've been hearing about today. So I'll tell you a little bit about MEARU. We'll talk about the design collaboration, and then some of the findings that we've been finding in the new houses with the building performance. So MEARU established in 1993, December 1993. So we've just had our 30th birthday, and we held a celebration talking about our birthday and different projects that we worked on through the years. So the first project that we started on was a passive solar retrofit of houses at the east side of Glasgow, where we did building performance evaluation, and we did indoor air quality tests. And so we've very much followed that line of inquiry all the way through from 1993 up to today. And Colin Porteous, our professor, Colin Porteous OBE, he started MEARU. He's an architect. Retired 2 years ago on his 80th birthday, and we still ring him up for all his knowledge now. I thought there was a picture on that one, but there wasn't. Yeah, so building performance evaluation, I suppose most of you probably know what it is, but it's a process that we go through to answer questions about the buildings. You know, are they working as the design intended? Do they reduce energy consumption? And are they healthy for people as well? And so, but at MEARU, what we want to do is if they're not, then we want to understand why. So we take a very forensic approach to our building performance evaluation to find out what works well and what doesn't work well. And we gather so much data. There's just like a wide variety of data that we collect, and but the whole idea is to try to improve the buildings if they need improving, but also to improve future buildings and to inform design. So a lot of the work that we've done is fed into building regulations, for example, as well. So, but we're very heavily involved looking at indoor air quality, or indoor environment quality, I should say. And when I joined MEARU, I joined as part of a team that was looking at the Innovate UK funded building performance evaluation programme, which was, they were called the Technology Strategy Board then, but now Innovate UK. It was a 4-year programme, £8 million, UK-wide, and all the results were publicly available as well. And we at MEARU engaged in 7 domestic projects in Scotland, so that was 26 houses across Scotland in the areas that you can see here on the map. And so we monitored them simultaneously for the project said there was like 2 parts of this project, and so the actual monitoring post-occupancy was a 2-year evaluation, and so we monitored the houses and took readings every 5 minutes for 2 years, and so then had a big dive into all of that data, and it was just a wide variety of different houses that we looked at, from 1-bedroom flats, sheltered housing, housing up at the Scotland's Housing Expo near to Inverness. We looked at the first passive house for social housing from Gannochy Trust. We looked at the biggest passive house development at the time, which was in Lockerbie. We looked at houses that were designed to be healthy. We looked at, these were sheltered housing, these were housing for over 65s. So it was just such a wide range, different building materials, different building types as well. So, when we do our building performance evaluation, what we tend to look at mainly is the temperature, the relative humidity, the carbon dioxide concentrations, and on these we looked at the window opening events. So we'd put like these sensors up on the windows. These were what we'd used in the rooms. They're battery powered, so we're not taking people's electricity. We set up monitoring of the electrical circuit. So we put like little current transformers on all of the electrical circuits serving the house. We monitored the mains gas, we monitored the mains electricity. We did it in living rooms, kitchens, master bedrooms and second bedrooms. So there was quite a lot of data that we were collecting, so every 5 minutes. But on top of that, we did air tightness testing, we did in situ U-value testing, we did thermography, occupant surveys, we did a design audit of the design against what we're reading, what we were finding. We did an electrical appliance survey in the house and an exit survey to find out how the people, what they learnt from us as well. And we used some of the techniques in that MEARU's developed over the years. So one of them is development of user guides for housings rather than the O&M manuals. We found houses that were had mouldy bathrooms as well, so we wanted to establish why. So we kind of dug a bit deeper. And there was lots of different things that we did. And then in 2015, October 2015, we had held an event called Building Better Buildings to try and understand the performance gap. So that was held at Glasgow School of Art, and it was where we first met. Andy Duncan came over to us and said that he's been working with Anderson, Bell Christie for quite some time, developing some new houses, and he'll be quite keen what he's learning about from us, healthiness in houses, and would be quite keen if we could work together. And as we all kind of know, that with this RIBA plan of work, usually projects finish at handover and there's no kind of like monitoring or feedback, and especially back 2015 that just was rarely happening. So what Andy had said was that he wants to close that gap. He wants to work on to understand, to build in some of the information that was found and to build it into the design. So we work very closely with Anderson, Bell Christie, and it was a project funded by Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, who are now BEST, as everybody knows them. So they funded us for 1 year to work alongside the design team, and we started it and kicked off with a workshop, which we had here in this room, and we also held a workshop at Campion Homes, who was the selected contractor as well. So we attended design team meetings, but one of the key things was a report as well to kind of like give baseline of what were the lessons that we learned from looking at those 26 houses? What were the key things? And like, if you cast your mind back to, the zero carbon agenda, way back in, there was a target of 2016, zero carbon homes, zero carbon buildings by 2016. So all the houses that we had monitored had been designed to meet the specifications of the zero carbon by 2016. What we were building in to the design was hoping to help to future-proof the houses long term. So there was quite a few things that we considered as part and talked about in the design team meetings, but the ones that I'm going to talk to you mainly about: energy consumption, materials, ventilation and indoor air quality. And then the building performance evaluation that we've been doing. So where we've got equipment set up in 8 of the houses, so 2 of the 1-bed, 2 of the 4-bed, and then 4 of the 2-bed houses. And it's been a pleasure, actually. It's been great getting to know the people in the houses, and so I'm compiling all of the stories that I think I've got pictures missing. Anyway, so one of the things that we pulled together as part of the workshop was airtightness. So airtightness at that time was, people were kind of like, it's quite difficult to achieve certain airtightness, and there was a nervousness about airtightness. But what we had seen was that most of the houses that we had monitored, and we did 2 tests, one at the beginning of 2 years and one at the end, and they were achieving their design targets. And but what we also did was forensic inspections of looking of where all the leakage was occurring. So when the airtightness tests were done, I'd be walking around behind the airtightness tester, taking photographs and documenting exactly where the leakage was occurring. So we've graphed that, and so we've got like the building fabric, the openings and the building services, and so we can see that there's quite a range of different places where the drafts were coming in. And so that was fed into the design, and it was taken on board in the design. And we've done the airtightness testing in these 8 houses, and we've found that the target was around 3 to 5, because there was at the time as well in 2015 there was a real nervousness about MVHR. We had monitored projects all over the UK, and the MVHR was seriously failing, and there were lots of problems, and so the design target was set between 3 and 5, so that we could develop a different ventilation approach in the houses that didn't rely on mechanical vent. And the houses are performing pretty well in airtightness. They meet and exceed the targets. But again, we did the documentation and followed around the airtightness tester, on our hands and knees, looking in cupboards, pulling things out, and everything. And we kind of like found, that there are leaks as well in the settlement cracks, under kitchen units, the loft hatches, a few around the windows and doors, trickle vents, so they are still there, but the airtightness targets have been met, and we'd still, you do expect it, even in passive house, you still get leaks in these same types of places as well. So we think that's a really positive result. So when we were looking at energy of the housing, this is where my engineering background came in, and so we used computer modelling, IES, and we did did a daylight study. We did looked at the sun path, so we could assess the situatories and look at the daylighting, but we also addressed the energy consumption, and we had the baseline. We had a baseline which was building regulations just to meet the backstop U values. Then we had the enhanced U values that Anderson, Bell Christie had designed, which was option 1 with double glazing, and then we tried with triple glazing, and we could see these kind of like different scenarios with windows open at different kind of like things, and you could see that with the triple glazing it meant that the tenants didn't have, there was the comfort issue that Grant was talking about earlier, so we were dealing with a comfort issue of cold downdrafts, but also with triple glazing the energy consumption was reduced, so this was the option that was designed in. There was always going to be wood fibre insulation in that, and so with the BPE and the surveys, we've been asking people, does the energy consumption meet the expectations? And, everyone's just really happy. It exceeds them, that they're paying less than where they lived before. And there was always comments as well about the cost of electricity. But then, we need to bear in mind how much everything went up, and for everybody as well. And is now coming back down.
Sorry, Janice, was option 2 went for now? It was triple glazing.
Yeah. And then And then some people were actually picking up, related to the energy consumption as well, about the windows and saying that they're high quality, that they're not cheap. The people are saying that they're gorgeous, they like the size of the windows as well, they let in a lot of daylight. And then another thing that we looked at was the ventilation, and because most of the houses were going to be, the single level, and they are here as well. One of the things that we picked up as well, that people sleeping in ground floor bedrooms are less likely to open the windows. So we developed the bespoke solution, and we tested the model on the IES thing, just to look at the CO2 concentrations for bedrooms as well. So and I don't know if you saw that in the houses as well, and they're just so robust to open and close, and so they were quite good. And so in one of the houses that we've been monitoring, I put up some of the results from this. So this is from May last year up to January this year, looking at the CO2 concentrations in the bedrooms, well, in the whole house. And this is somebody that interacts with these vents on a daily basis and sleeps with in their bedroom with the vents open. She's lived here for a very long time, so I even heard the stories about AK Bell going around and knocking on the doors if the windows weren't open. So she's a regular window opener, but she opens these every night, and you can see that there's very the indoor air quality is just excellent. It's below 1,000 parts per million, which was what we wanted. So that's another good outcome. But with the materials as well, it affects indoor air quality. We talked about in the workshops, we talked about it in the design team meetings, and we were quite concerned about VOC emissions from materials, and we talked, where they come from and what they are. And one of the things that were changed, we talked about the flooring as well. So from chipboard flooring that's got glues, that was substituted for a concrete floor, which was also, if people couldn't afford to put a floor covering down, then they could live with the concrete floor. It's kind of like polished, and there's you could put down rugs on the top, but it's also good if there are wheelchair users to help them get around the houses. So and there were other things that we talked about, but we've done VOC testing as well in the houses. So we've set up our little instruments and then sent off to a lab. And this particular house, they burn scented candles and have reed diffusers on their house, within the house. So you can see that the total volatile organic compounds are slightly elevated, and most of it is from light hydrocarbons. So, and like it's saying that it's possibly building materials or aerosol cans, but I think it's actually to do with the gas, the fuel in the candles, rather than the building materials, because the building material, I should have put that one on here, the building material one has come back very low, so it's kind of occupant activities. So I wanted to do the test as well in the house where the ventilation has been performing really well and that the CO2 levels were really low. But the VOCs are almost at severe level. And that was quite interesting. And again, it's not from the building fabric, it's from the occupants and how they use the house. And so in this particular house, they have a lot of air fresheners dotted around, the plug-in air fresheners, the Glade air fresheners, and cans of air fresheners. So there's a lot. But even though the window opening is very frequent, to the point when I go round, I'm quite cold, and so the door has to be closed and the windows are closed because I feel quite uncomfortable in there. So. But the VOCs are actually quite high. So it shows that it just they're from these alcohol products, from cleaning products, from antiseptic. There was that antibacterial hand wash. There was and soaps and deodorants and perfumes, and again from the air fresheners in the houses, and all of these are elevated in the concentrations. But it just goes to show that it's quite important to consider VOCs because they do linger, and that ventilation isn't actually clearing them as effectively as you would imagine from somebody who's such a liberal window opening. We looked at overheating, and we all know, there's risks involved with the temperatures being too warm in houses, and particularly bedrooms above 24 degrees C, then that affects people's comfort at night and their sleep, which could affect their cognitive performance the following day. So again, with the model, that's how we assessed the overheating. And initially, the roof lights were positioned over the living room windows, but the model came back and said that there was a risk of overheating in the living area. So the roof light was moved to where you saw it today, and then that risk is just almost zero. Which was great. And then looking at the temperature as well, what we're seeing here is temperatures. The green is that 20 to 22. The orange is 24 to 28 or 26 in bedrooms, and the red is over the 28 degrees. So you can see that it's actually quite good because some people might need a warmer environment as well. And so they're not overheating, they're not reaching those thresholds when you look at the static one. And I was quite excited about seeing these results because what we've assessed before, so I've kind of like on our 26 houses, that we can see that especially in the summer, every house is overheating. So this kind of browny colour and the red, that's the extent of overheating. And these houses, the new houses, are not, performing as bad as these. I always thought every house I've been to overheats all the way through July in Scotland, but that's not the case here. So, which is great. And then daylight, we did also use the model again to assess the daylight factors. There was a concern about the main bedrooms with the situatory, so we wanted to make sure that the average daylight factors were above 2%, and in the bedrooms they were. So we knew that they would be adequately daylit, and we knew that the kitchens and the living rooms too would be very well daylit as well. So, and people are saying, when you're asking them about natural and artificial light, that they have an awareness that the positioning of the houses are good for natural light. They don't need to put the big lights on very often. They like, with the roof light, they love it, and they love the sunlight that comes into the houses. And people are interacting with the skylights when the temperatures are quite warm as well. They're learning to open these to use a stack effect as well. But there were a couple of little negatives as well, where somebody had said that the natural light could be a little bit better, but in the rest of the house there's loads of light. And somebody had mentioned that they get a bit of glare from an outside light, but the majority of the comments are all really, really positive as well. So, and so what we're doing with these results, which we will hopefully have more of a dissemination as most of the results are finalised, is helping to close that performance gap as well, to feed into designs. And then once we're out and disseminating this more widely, then then it will feed into other people's designs as well. So that is the hope. And I think I just want to finish saying thank you. Thank you for the walk around and inside all the houses. That was just really lovely to get inside today, to give everyone a feel for what we're talking about as well. The lessons that we learned, we've got case study information as well in the report, and it's available at our GSA radar site. It used to be on the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre website, but I think it's a bit lost in there now, so that can be downloaded from there. And I don't know, Magdalena, if you keep these presentations and you forward them to people, just so that they can get that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so thank you everybody for the presentation so far. It's been really exciting to hear the results from Janice, and I really enjoyed walking around. I will introduce myself here. So my name is Jessica Noel-Smith, and I'm an architect. I'm also a PhD researcher, and I'll just give you a little bit of a background of why I'm here today. So back in the days when Janice was talking about the building performance analysis around the early design stages, I was working with Bell Christie on this wonderful project. And so there's been a few times I've been able to be sat in this beautiful boardroom and talked about the design process as well. And so it's really wonderful to be able to come back and see the real thing, which is really exciting. So since I worked at ABC as a project architect, I then went on a slightly different journey where I worked for a reputable housing association that delivered housing of high accessible quality for lots of people in Scotland. And through that kind of client side work, I then developed a passion for talking more and more about the quality and the positive impact of accessible design. I then went on to work with the University of Stirling in the Dementia Services Development Centre, and I specialised as a dementia design consultant for a few years. And that was my segue into my own PhD research, which I'm embarking on. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. And through that process, I've founded a company called Beyond Access, which basically is a kind of an accessible design consultancy. My kind of key takeaway around accessible design is that it's so much more than just compliance, and as we've seen in Gannochy today, you see the real positive impact of that, and I believe in it so much I've made a company out of it while I'm trying to do my research, so it's quite an exciting time. So this is a favourite quote of mine that I've come across recently, talking about how access is not really a special need, it's a human need and it's a human right. And so that's the kind of standpoint I start from in a lot of my work. I'll give you a little bit of a background of my research, and I'll tell you a story that links out quite well to Selwyn Goldsmith, which I think is a nice person to be talking about today. But my thesis is around architectural design ethics and accessibility, and I'm exploring a human rights-based approach to accessible design and looking at how ethics are applied in contemporary architectural design practice. For me, in kind of simple words, it's around looking at that gap between delivering a building that calls itself accessible by being compliant and the user experience telling us that it's not accessible for them. There's something amiss. So that's where I think there's a lot of work to be done there to bring the two together. So back in 1963, Selwyn Goldsmith released his first publication on designing for the disabled, and this is the technical manual full of, as Andy well knows, all the detailed design requirements for people with disabilities. This is really the starting point for my research, and I'll kind of tell you why. So in this manual, this is the sort of the origin of the wheelchair turning circle in spatial planning. And for me, what's really interesting about how this turning circle was derived was that this is the theoretical, drawn on paper, manoeuvring of a NHS Model 8F wheelchair that was the most popular in use at the time, kind of drawn with one wheel locked and the chair making a 90-degree manoeuvre and then another 90-degree manoeuvre. So the dimensions on this diagram are not quite 1500 as we know it today, and the reason for that is because when you make a turn in a wheelchair in practice, you very rarely just turn in a circle. You have to almost do like a 3-point turn. So the orange circle there kind of represents a 5'2" circle, which translates to what we know today as the 1500 turning circle. But the thing that's really interesting to me about the fact that this dimension was derived back in 1963 was that at that time, people living with disabilities did not have equal rights in society. They were hidden from society, and quite often they were institutionalised and taken away from their homes. And since that time, there's been a massive change in what we've seen in the disability rights movement and legislation. And I'll not go into all of that, conscious of time, but if anyone wants to talk more about what's happened in those years, I'll quite happily go into it with you. But the key takeaway is that this turning circle was created at a time that is very different to now, yet it is still in use. It's in practice every day. And kind of a fun but not really very positive fact was that the original 5'2" circle, when my theory around this, and I would love for someone to tell me more definitively if this is true, when metrification happened around the kind of 70s and 80s time, when we went from feet and inches into millimetres, that circle went from the equivalent of 1575 millimetres down to 1500 as a nice round number. So it actually got smaller, even though it was derived as the smallest size you could possibly manoeuvre a wheelchair in, theoretically, which is the equivalent of like an elbow, you know, and you're thinking about the real person in the wheelchair. So why is this a problem? Like, why do we need to keep looking at this dimensional turning space that we use so much? And really that it's too small for many. Something I didn't go into in great detail in the beginning of my presentation is I am an experienced care support worker. I have experienced the difficulty of trying to manoeuvre in tight spaces. And so this is a minimum standard that's quite commonly applied as the standard, and by doing that we're perpetuating inequality. We're making this sort of minimum, it's the floor, you know, it shouldn't be something to be aimed for, but we're calling it a standard when it really should be the starting point. And so I think there's some really, really interesting research happening around defining things like architectural exclusion. There's a paper in the Yale Law Journal that talks about architectural exclusion as a system to exclude people by race or socioeconomic status, and I think that's equally applicable to people with disabilities. What's really explicit in this paper that's quite interesting is that the law can't really recognise architectural exclusion as a system yet, but I think that might kind of come through. So I think that's where we're at a real tipping point in how we approach accessible design from a human rights perspective. And so Selwyn Goldsmith had developed his publications first in 1963. He later released another 3 kind of updates to that. But in 1997, something really interesting happened, and that was just after the DDA, 1995, the Disability Discrimination Act was released in the UK. He then released another publication that didn't get published by REBA, but it was still called the same initial title of Designing for the Disabled, but it's called A New Paradigm. And this is where he kind of rescinds his initial approach to accessible design, and he criticises DocM really, really heavily. And he's talking about it from the perspective of universal design principles. And so he says here, they are people whom the architect can disable, but whom he or she need not disable, or not disable as severely as they commonly do. So basically, buildings and the built environment has the power to enable people. It also has the power to disable people, and we need to really think about the power that we have in that. And so the thing about that quote for me is that they are people. People living with disabilities are people, and it's really important to remember that. And it's quite easy when we're designing, especially in a plan, to kind of lose a little bit of sight about the humanity of what happens in these spaces. So I'll not go too far into the models of disability, but broadly speaking, we've got 2 models. There's the medical model and the social model. And when we talk about the social model, we're talking about being disabled by the environment around us. And when we talk about the medical model, it's very much kind of inward looking and an embodiment of your own impairment, and there's a problem to be solved here. So when I'm talking about disability, I'm very much in the realms of the social model of disability, just to be clear. And traditionally, the social model was established back in 1975 by lots of disability rights groups, and it was a really good way to talk to the politicians and people who were in positions of power about how being disabled was a construct of society and why things needed to change. But now we're seeing a kind of relational social model, which is quite interesting, and it's more around people's perceived barriers. So you might not be officially under the label of having a disability, but you might still feel disabled by the environment. So that social model is certainly growing. And really the key message here around talking about it from a human perspective is that in this human need, there's 1 in 6 people globally will live with a disability, which is 16% of the global population, and that's rising. And that's the equivalent of 1.3 billion people. It's really massive. People with disabilities are the world's largest minority. It is intersectional, it is global, it is something that exists that the built environment has the ability to make better for people. And so talking about the ageing population is also relevant. At the minute, talking about older age and disability seems to happen in 2 different conversations, but really by the time we age, at whatever number that happens to be, there's debate about that, we're essentially designing for disability as well. We're trying to make spaces accessible for age-related frailty, for people living with dementia, and so we talk about lifetime neighbourhoods at Gannochy, which is so important, and that's where accessible design and age-friendly design very much work together. And the World Health Organization has done a study, and they project that of those born in 2015 or later, 1 in 3 people will live with dementia in their lifetime. So designing for dementia and cognitive need is also really critical, and it's all part of the big picture around why accessible and high quality accessible spaces is so important. A favourite quote of mine from one of my colleagues at the University of Stirling, from Judith Phillips, is that we are all stakeholders in ageing, so it's something we can all relate to. We might not all relate to disability, but we might at some point in our life, so it's really, really important. And a little bit blurry, but this is just a little infographic of giving a bit of a picture of all the different ways that people can be disabled. And it's quite simple, but I think it gives a really good kind of picture of the difference that, you know, there's not a very huge proportion of people using wheelchairs, but there's a lot of people who might require the assistance of others and people who would have difficulty walking and navigating. And so for me, when I talk about the 1500 turning circle, it's not just about people manoeuvring a wheelchair in that space, it's about a space that represents all these people who might require that accessible toilet or that extra elbow room or space for a carer. It kind of represents a whole realm of needs. And so, get my slides, yeah. And so with it being a human need, it's also an environmental need. We can't really talk about places being truly sustainable until they are socially sustainable. And, you know, we talked a little bit about the social model of disability. And interestingly, when we talk about good quality dementia design, we often talk about it as a first line intervention. The environment is a non-pharmacological intervention for somebody's cognitive impairment. Somebody might be able to avoid medicalisation of their need by just being in a suitable environment. There's that much power in it. So again, you know, we can create places that are enabling, that creates equity on top of equality. We can increase dignity, participation, health, a lot of the stuff we've talked about already. So we're really looking for empowering environments rather than accessible environments is maybe one way to frame this. And so just to kind of sum up, I think with this kind of image, I'm trying to kind of show the levels of scale that we're looking at here. Like, you can talk about master planning in accessibility and getting that kind of seed planted from the really early stages when we're quite zoomed out from a project. But then we also need to think about the spaces that people inhabit. And within those spaces, we're thinking about everything they touch, everything they maneuver around. So it's of a massive scale, and it's for the benefit of everyone. And I think Yep, this is my last slide. So I think what's really exciting about thinking about accessible design in a kind of a new way is that I really feel it's an emergent field. So we went through the process of everyone calling buildings sustainable, and everybody said, what does that mean? How can it be sustainable? At what point do we describe it sustainable? Do we go passive house? Do we define an air tightness? How can that be? And I think it's the same with accessibility. So when we talk about spaces being accessible, or we talk about it's compliant, therefore it's accessible, it's a bit like that really wishy-washy term of saying it's sustainable. So my question is always, well, in what way is it sustainable, and to what quality is it sustainable? So while it can feel quite negative when we talk about accessibility and the need for accessibility and the projections of how many of us are going to age and age into ill health, I think it's important to realise we're at a really exciting time in the design world where we can see there's positive hope of knowing how a good environment can benefit you, knowing how a space that's been designed well from the outset can enable you to live your whole life in your same home. So yeah, very happy to talk to anyone more about this stuff. As you can tell, I live and I breathe it. It's very much my day to day, but coming here to the Gannochy Trust to see it in action as well is just such a privilege. So thank you very much, everybody.
I'm very, very conscious of time, but if anybody has any pressing questions, then we can have a very, very short session. But I do also realise that we've all talked to each other during the day, which was quite a nice networking element to the day as well. If anybody has any questions, you can just email them to me and I can share them with our speakers. Because I'm sure that you'll be reflecting on the entire day today, and then maybe in a couple of weeks' time, something will come to you. Looking around the room?
Just one, I guess. It's really, I think, do I need to use this?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So I guess first of all, just thank you very much to the Gannochy Trust today and to everyone that's presented. It's been a fantastic day. Really glad it came along. I guess a question to the Gannochy Trust. I mean, the evaluation, building performance evaluation work that MEARU have done for the new builds, is there any intention to look at the existing and the retrofits around using the same kind of principle, the same level of environmental testing, and trying to achieve the same kind of environmental quality levels?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I said, we did some testing of the current spec when we did it back in 2014. There wasn't so much to the environmental side; it was more about the technical performance of the walls and to make sure that we weren't creating problems within the structure. Whereas, with the new houses, it's been more about the environment that we've created. And I think when we do the monitoring of the next pilot projects, then we'll include the environmental as well as the technical as well, because we want to still make sure that we're not, because it's retrofit, we're not creating a problem that wasn't there before. But I think we'll be more interested as well in the in the environment that we're creating, to make sure that that's an improvement than what was there previously.
Well, if that's that, then I would just like to thank everyone in this room, everybody for coming, and all our speakers, and Andy for inviting us here and showing us around, and Gilbert as well, and Jess for speaking so passionately about her work, and Janice for telling us all the background information, and Rowena and Caroline for giving us the background to the start of the project and the process as well. And everybody for just being such a fantastic team and delivering something that has so much meaning to the people who live here, and sharing that knowledge with others, most importantly, because this is the important part, isn't it? It's not just an award and a success, it's sharing it and then being able to replicate it in other places, because we want people to live happy long lives. So with that, maybe we should come to a close, and thank you very much, everybody.